Okay, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the State Library of Queensland. A very warm welcome to you all this evening. My name is Sonia Cooper. I'm currently the State Librarian and CEO, and it's my job just to give a short opening before handing over to our facilitator, Kelly Higgins-Devine, this evening. But before I begin, may I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are so fortunate to meet this evening, and pay my respects to elders past, present and future. We're told that Kurilpa Point here on which the State Library of Queensland is located was traditionally a storytelling and gathering place, and so we seek to proudly continue that tradition here tonight. Can I formally acknowledge our event partner, the ABC, and in particular tonight's facilitator, Kelly Higgins-Devine, who is a 612 ABC radio presenter, as we probably all very much know. And importantly, of course, our four panellists who'll be here with us sharing their insights and stories this evening. So it's Paul White, Fiona Cullen, Robbie Crowther, and Alison Mosley. And of course to all of you as distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Our aspiration is that the State Library is a place for communities to come together, to share stories and knowledge, and to learn, to be inspired and to create. We seek to be a community hub where everyone is encouraged to have a voice. We invite you to join the conversation this evening and share your stories, whether tonight or in the future, and thoughts either online this evening using the hashtag #BelongingQueensland, BelongingQLD that is, or when Kelly throws to the audience for questions later this evening. This year, we're exploring the theme of belonging, our sense of belonging to our family, our communities, and a particular relevance to tonight's conversation to sport, to a team, to a club, and to our state. Today's panel brings strong voices from very diverse sporting backgrounds and a wealth of personal and career experiences and life experiences, representing the impact of sport on our state's social cohesion. Queenslanders in Conversation is one of the programs we're holding here at SLQ during 2016 to delve into our theme of belonging and start conversations all around the state. So we're really excited tonight that this talk is being live streamed online and also at an event in Burdekin this evening. So hello Burdekin. Some of the stage design pieces that you also see here tonight, including the little cricketer boy and the backdrop, are inspired by cover illustrations from the historic The Queenslander magazines in our collection. And these design pieces also form part of the interactive installation currently in the info zone on level 1. Our library shop is also selling posters of the cover illustrations on level 1 during opening hours if you're interested. Now we do have a photographer taking photos of the event this evening, so if you'd prefer not to be photographed, please let one of our team know. And once again, can I just say that we're so proud to be partnering with the ABC for tonight's Queenslanders in Conversation talk, and I'm delighted to now put you in the very safe hands of our facilitator, Kelly Higgins-Devine. Thank you, Kelly.
Ah yes, my beloved Brisbane Lions. It's been a long time since I've heard that particular theme at the end of a grand final. Good evening and welcome to the State Library of Queensland for the second of our special forums on Queensland and belonging. How good was that, listening back to some of those extraordinary Queensland sporting moments, the Broncos, Susie O'Neill, Adam Scott, Kathy Freeman and the Lions. And tonight's question: what does sport do for Queensland? How does it shape our communities and our sense of belonging? And I come at this question, like many people who live in Queensland, as someone who changed states. I started off as a Victorian, but have now lived in Queensland longer than I ever lived there, and consider myself a Queenslander through and through. So what happened that I could switch allegiances? What is it about Queensland that it either seeps through your skin, into your blood and becomes part of your DNA, or it just doesn't? And if it doesn't, you will never be a true Queenslander. And when you think of the great performances by individuals and teams from the Sunshine State, it does make your heart swell with pride. And it makes you wonder whether there's something here, be it the weather, the underdog tag, the natural talent, that allows us to punch above our weight in the sporting arena. And my guests all have very different but equally valid experience of representing this state against others and in the international arena. So please meet your guests for this evening, starting off with Robbie Crowther. Robbie, who hails from Cloncurry, became World Junior Long Jump Champion at the age of 19. He was tempted into athletics after spending his youth playing rugby league. You lost him, Paul White, and now gives back to the sport by coaching Indigenous kids. And you will not be surprised by this, Robbie was once voted the sexiest man in track and field. Round of applause for Robbie Crowther. Did you get anything for that?
No, it's
Really?
It was a mate of mine that went through my Wikipedia and uploaded that on himself, so I still get that till this day, and it's always funny.
Leave it there. Fiona Cullen has represented her country at 2 sports. She's a former Australian sprint hurdles champion who later switched to bobsleigh and took part in the World Championships. Fiona also understands the corporate world, having worked as business development manager for Australian University Sport. Please welcome Fiona Cullen. Alison Mosley is one of Australia's most successful Paralympians. She played wheelchair basketball for Australia at 3 successive games, winning silver medals in Sydney and Athens. A Warwick girl by birth, she lived in Tassie for a few years, but couldn't resist coming home to Queensland. Alison Mosley. And finally, Paul White is CEO of the most successful club in the history of the NRL, the Brisbane Broncos. He has extensive business experience, particularly in the resources industry, and as a consequence knows and loves the bush. Paul was a bit of a league legend himself, being named in the Queensland Police Team of the Century alongside Mal Meninga, no less. Auspicious company, Paul White. And welcome, panellists. Let's start with the essence of this question this evening. What does being a Queenslander mean when you're on a sporting field? Robbie, I'll start with you.
Coming from an old bush town, from Cloncurry, born out there, never knew like the likes of myself competing at the top level and knowing where your roots are from. I was never coached as a kid growing up through high school or anything like that. Never had a coach, never trained, or just jump off natural ability. And to be a Queenslander, I get passion from just knowing where I come from my history as well, from Aboriginal and Torres Strait. And then, I can't really explain it, to be honest. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Fiona?
I'd have to, it's a really hard question to answer, and I think that's partly what the whole conversation, maybe at the end you can come back to us and we can summarise from the discussion, but I honestly think it is, it's in your DNA. I think if you're born here, I can tell a story. It might illustrate it for me. I was doing some filming recently for an online program, and I'm a presenter. And we were in the group. People were milling around. I was wearing a blue singlet, and the guys that were milling around were having a conversation about rugby league. And one of them went, "Oh, you're wearing the wrong colour." And I said, "I bleed maroon, my friend, and don't you question that." And I said, just because this colour looks good on the screen doesn't mean it has anything to do with, I'm loath to wear it. So it's in your DNA. It's you would never ever give it up. I would possibly consider giving up my Australian passport. I would never give up my Queensland passport.
Alison, mostly for you, what does it mean to be a Queenslander when you're out on the sporting field?
Oh, well, I'm like Robbie, grew up in the bush and just rural, never had any coach, but I was a hyperactive kid, didn't understand the term what hyperactive was, and hated people telling me I was hyperactive, but I couldn't sit still and just joined into all the sports that I could. And you just grow up with the TV on, and you've got your heroes that are out there, and I'm thinking I kind of grew up with all the cricketers and then any of the Olympic Games and the swimming and athletics, and you just go, wow, this is amazing. As a 10-year-old, I was on the matting, standing in front of the Commonwealth Games and Raylene Boyle with her 400-metre win, and my parents were actually there at the Games, but I was out in the bush with tears down my eyes going, that's just amazing, I don't understand it, but it's amazing. So, yeah, it's Queensland pride, yeah.
And for you, Paul White?
Yeah, I'm very fortunate too. I had a country upbringing. I was born in Charleville, so sport for us, particularly in the bush, it was very uncomplicated, very few coaches. My mother coached, I think, our under 35 kilogram rugby league team because no one else coached out there. So Mum made great biscuits and she controlled the boys with that. But we played on red dirt and we grew up. I guess one of the things it does mean to me, having also been a police officer, is it's healthy communities as well. I think sport in Queensland is really part of making our communities healthy, whether that's in Brisbane or whether that's in Cairns or whether it's in the Burdekin where people are joining in tonight. Like, sport just helps make our communities healthy, and I think that's a wonderful legacy that sport has in Queensland. We've got a wonderful climate. We punch above our weight in terms of producing Olympic athletes and elite sporting people, but I think it really means healthy communities. And for me, living and working in some of those communities, when you've got sport as part of your community, communities are a happy and safe place to sort of live and work. So I think it plays a really important part in making our communities healthy.
Well, I mean, many of the panellists come from rural or remote communities this evening, and Queensland is a big state, and other people don't understand that, I think, until they get here and think, oh, I know, I'll just go to Townsville from Brisbane for the day, and then it's like, yeah, well, that'll take you 2 to 3, so enjoy that drive. But do you think that's part of it, though, that being in sometimes in communities that are quite isolated, where you have to create something yourselves, or you create nothing will be created for you, that's where the importance of sporting teams, for example, getting out there together when you're kids and playing, getting to know each other, that becomes all the more important when you don't have the extras that you might have in a city to distract you. Who wants to go to Alison?
Yes, wholeheartedly, and I think it's also that team commitment part of it as well, because you don't have the numbers to tap into to pull together your basketball team or your soccer team or whatever. And it's like, no, you're in, little sister's in, and, there's the team. And so it's all about, learning to depend on one another, but also the art of getting along.
Robbie, for you?
Obviously growing up in Cloncurry, I moved to a little town called Bluffs, which is 200 k's west of Rockhampton, and the population was about 200 people back then, and at the school there was only 47 kids, but we made the most of that. We go down the football field with Dave Taylor and the likes of other football players from Blackwater and that, and we all joined together, and you bond that friendship and that community, and then you obviously got your parents and then other family parents, and you get that support structure from them as well. And my mum and dad hated me making every single team and forking out money to travel to Rocky and Brisbane every year with touch football, rugby league, cricket, all the sports I could name. And I'm very fortunate for them to fork out that, and I don't think I'll be paying them back one day, because being in track and field, the financial stuff wasn't so good, but I did it for the passion for myself, my family and friends. So I think in those little communities, I still get support from back home till this day, and always asked how I was going and getting messages every now and then. So I think that Queensland spirit has always been there.
How did you get into long jump? Given you had those sort of traditional sports around you were playing them, obviously very good at them as well.
Yep.
Why long jump?
I'm not 100% sure, actually. I just did it every time school carnivals come around, and I was always good at running, always age champion on every year, but in Bluff they had to extend the long jump pit because I was jumping out of it. So, that was pretty funny. Yeah, so I've been out there recently, and everyone always asks me the same question. I remember we had to extend the pit for you, and I was just like, yeah, all right. And I went out there to the school and visited the school and took a photo and put out where I was from, and the grassroots. So I made my first team in year 6, and never made a Queensland team till I left Bluff and went to Bowen for 2 years, and then made my last Queensland team there and finished school, and then went on to Canberra at the AIS for 8 years and went on scholarship. So yeah, I'm just one of those kids that just run and jump.
Parents would have been happy to see that scholarship.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, exactly right. It was very, very helpful as well, and very appreciated for myself to get out there. And a shy kid from a country town, I could never get up here and speak to an audience, or in school I was always getting asked. I was never the person to put my hand up or anything like that. And so I've come a long way, and sport has taught me myself to get up and approach, and also give back to the communities and tell my culture to put your hand up and ask for help. So it's always a good thing.
Well, we'll talk to you more a bit later about the work you've been doing out in the Indigenous communities. You've only just come back, I believe, from a stint.
Yeah, in Groote Island. Yeah, it's good.
Paul, for you, Charleville. I mean, my first radio gig was Charleville, so I've been there. Yeah. That once again, an isolated community, but very, they're tight as and very proud.
Yeah, it was interesting. I was born there in 1966. We moved to Brisbane, so we had 6 years. Dad was in the bank, so we had 6 years in Brisbane. And there were 4 TV channels in Brisbane. We had a TV. We took the TV back to Charleville in 74. We went back there in 74, and there was no television. Not even the ABC had made their way to Charleville. So we used to play board games and cards after dinner, and obviously sport was all we had, which is great. Like, I know kids have many more options now, but I think as parents, I've got 4 beautiful daughters. I think we've got to force them out the door a little bit more, because I think that's one of the reasons that we've produced so many great sporting stars. I know, just listening to Robbie's story there, there's many, young Indigenous men that are just so naturally talented, but we've got to provide the pathways for them. So in Charleville, and I was in Rockhampton, I worked in Emerald, I've worked in just about every area of the state. Yes, sports just plays such a massive impact on the community. Not so much the winning and losing, but just the collective of uniting communities. And you talk about mums and dads. My parents were people who gave and probably never counted the costs. They gave a lot back and fundraised and all of that. We didn't have a lot of money. There was 5 of us in our family, and if you were good at sport, you'd make a rep team. Because if you're in Western Queensland, it wasn't hard to get selected. You just had to put your hand up, and I played in my brother's team and things like that. But I think we owe our parents and their generation a hell of a lot, and I always think to ourselves that my generation, what's our legacy going to be? And I hope that we can continue to carry on, you know, the great traditions that our parents taught us about community sport and about working hard for your local communities, you know.
Yeah. And Fiona, what's your background? Are you from a country background? Or?
No, I'm a Brizzy girl, born and bred. But I think what everyone said is sport has this amazing way of uniting people regardless of their skill set. So if you've got, you know, a bat and a ball, some simple rules, and everyone gets it, then everyone can be part of it. So that's the thing that sport does. It actually brings people together outside of, you know, board games and cards. Like, that's the beauty of sport. You know, not everyone can play a musical instrument, not everyone has access to it, but, you know, everywhere has a patch of dirt and someone somewhere's got some shaped ball of some sort. And I mean, my first sport was gymnastics, and that came about because I was, you know, they had the health checks that go around to primary schools. So, you know, I had
back in the day.
Oh yeah, way back in the day, right? Yeah. We're all showing our age up here, it's awesome. And I remember when there were 4 channels and you had to go like that to the dial and turn you had to stand and change the channel.
That was a sport.
That was a sport, it was. No such thing as like remote control surfing, that didn't exist. But yeah, so, you know, I was diagnosed with a scoliosis of my spine, and they suggested to my mum that, you know, put her in gymnastics, which worked out a treat for me because it taught me, I think, probably not hyperactive wasn't used, but Mum would be walking through, you know, Big W, and all of a sudden she'd be having a conversation with my feet because I'd be walking on my hands. So, you know, it was just naturally lent me towards that. So I think when you have, you know, kids naturally they have a desire, they have a need or an outlet to express themselves, and sport's one of the easiest arenas to actually engage kids of all levels and all ages. And if you can give a kid an opportunity to realise that they can do one thing, then they can almost grasp that they can do just about anything. And something that I think that we have as Queenslanders is that fighting spirit. You know, I think you go back to the history of how this state was carved out as a colony. You know, we had the odd convicts here, but they shut that down a couple of years before free settlement came. So everyone who came to this state in 1845 basically had to carve out, literally with their hands, carve out a living. And I think that's part of the Queensland spirit. And, you know, you see that on the sporting field. People, you know, if a Queenslander is backed into a corner, they dig their heels in and they just work harder. And it's you know, it's not that the other states don't have that, but it's something that is quintessentially Queensland. So I think, you know, the combination of giving people the opportunity to try something and getting people involved, and then giving them that concept or that idea that you could do something, you could be good at something. That's all it takes. And you add that fighting, determined spirit to it, recipe for magic.
Is it the underdog tag that we
I think that's
carry with a bit of pride?
I think that's what we call it now. That's sort of something that we've. But I think if you were to go back to, you know, the early history of this state, the people that chose to come here, you know, did just that, and they literally carved out a life for themselves. And, you know, alongside an incredibly fierce warrior-like peoples who were already living here. So in order for early colonialists and Europeans to establish a life here, there was significant bloodshed. And that's something that we'll also talk about with, you know, the Indigenous owners of the land that were here before white fellas arrived. But, you know, so I think there's some really... I don't think we can discard what gets bred into your DNA just by virtue of having to carve out a life for yourselves. And that's just the colony of Brisbane. Like, let's not even, you know, North Queensland is a whole other thing again.
They still want us to see.
Yeah, I was about to say this. Yeah. So, you know, you ask a North Queenslander, they probably would. Someone from North Queensland, I thank God we've got you here, Paul, because you kind of, yeah, or the West. But, you know, it's like, they always forget about the North, you know, people from North Queensland.
Yeah, and yet we've had so many great sports people from up there.
Incredible.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, Paul, just talking about kids, one of the criticisms that's levelled at the big co, it's not just rugby league, is that not enough comes back to grassroots clubs, that they work with these kids, they train these kids as young athletes, get them to the point where they can begin a transition to a professional sporting career, and that's what you want for any talented kid in any sport. But there's no decent financial reward then for those clubs that have put so much love, time and energy into these kids. Do we need to give some more love to grassroots football or netball or whatever it might be?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I'm fortunate. I obviously work for the Broncos, but I benefited from the work of the Broncos when I was a policeman like 15 years ago. And I'll sum it up in this story. I worked in a place called Middlemount, where Anna Mears is from, and I was a policeman out there, and I had a big issue with drugs in the community at the time. And there were some people that moved to town. I was pretty good at getting rid of people from our community when the situation warranted it, but I did it by lawful means, of course. So the easy thing was law enforcement and getting rid of the drugs coming into our community, and we did that fairly effectively. But what we also needed was there's a cause why kids are turning to drugs, and one of the things, we didn't have any school sport. And the Broncos ran a program then, and they still do, 20 years on, which was called the Cyril Connell Cup. They funded the high school netball team, and they also funded the high school rugby league team. We played in Central Highlands, Emerald, Capella, Thierry, Blackwater and Middlemount. And I coached both teams, netball and league. And the Broncos, I wasn't very good at netball, but But it was great for me because I was waiting for that I could get to know obviously young people in the community, but just having that avenue of sport and as I said, the Broncos supported that 20 years ago, and it still exists today. Another example, we'll be in Rockhampton on Friday night. We've got a sold out dinner in Rocky. Every bit of money we raise on Friday night will go back to Junior League. It's our 20th regional dinner we've run in the last 4 years. This stuff doesn't make the back page of the Courier Mail. I wish it did, but we've raised over $85,000 for Junior League in the last 4 years in Queensland. And for those who have worked in junior sport, a $5,000 or a $10,000 donation goes a hell of a long way. So we don't do that simply because there is no PR in that. We just know that you've got to earn your right to take young men, in our case, out of those communities, and you've got to be seen by parents as a safe pair of hands because they entrust in you the care of the young man coming from those country locations. So we understand that. So it's about reinvesting to earn the right to do business for us, and recruiting is part of our business in those centres, but also giving back. So I'll hold myself to account for as long as I'm in my role about being able to put back into junior sport, and I think every professional sporting club has a real obligation to do that.
We've got a great audience here tonight at the State Library of Queensland watching on as we talk about sport. We'll get some questions a bit later. But how many of you watched Origin 1? Bit of a yes, or we've got a lot of hands. Just a verbal yes for the radio audience. Yes. And of course we won, which is magnificent. 1-0, we love that. How much does Origin play? And I've told this story before, but when I first got here, 1985, year 12, got myself a boyfriend. And he bought me Origin tickets. But he would not hand them over until I had learned every player, their position and their original club.
Good man.
Which, being 17, I went, okay, then yeah, that'd be fine.
No,
so I did that, which actually helped me enjoy the game a bit more because I kind of knew what was going on. But Origin is I think, where you find out whether you're a Queenslander. Because even though I might not watch a lot of rugby league day to day, sorry to make that admission, but come Origin time, I get white line fever. The broadcast starts, and all of a sudden, and is anybody else like this? It's like, like rugby league, nothing wrong with it. Origin starts though, and all of a sudden you're frothing at the mouth. You hate anyone dressed in blue. For some reason, the referees are all corrupt. You can't say "shut up, Gus Gould" enough. I'm muting the television, putting the ABC call on. So I can't stand at the moment longer. That this is a big part. Origin is such a big part of whether you're a Queenslander or not. That's when you know, as Fiona so beautifully said, that you bleed maroon.
You bleed maroon, yeah.
Yeah, it's Origin, and I'm sure there's some people in the room who remember pre-Origin, and I grew up in that pre-Origin era as well as post-Origin. The reason we're so passionate is that a lot of our best players went to Sydney because we didn't have poker machines in Queensland, and they did south of the border, and so we couldn't afford to hang on to our best talent. So the Brisbane Rugby League comp, which was a great rugby league comp, all the best players that came through would be taken, and they'd come back and play against us in New South Wales jerseys. But as kids, we all still, and Queensland has still got great attendances at interstate games, even when we were getting, touched up on the scoreboard. So we sort of still carry that with us, that tribalism or that... hatred's a really strong word, I don't know. But I guess that's what it was.
It's in the ballpark.
Yeah, it's close to that. So I think and when Origin, everyone doubted its success down south, but I don't think anyone in Queensland ever doubted success. So it sort of sums up what we're about, doesn't it? And everyone's got routines. I've got my 4 daughters. They tend to talk a little bit too much in the game, even though they're passionate, but we have chocolates, and it's a real event. And in communities in the country, by the way, they go quiet during Origin. So you just, as a police officer, you're praying we win, because if you don't win, all hell breaks loose straight after the game. So, yeah.
What about the other panellists? Do you remember? Does that play in for you? Origin, something about being a Queenslander. I noticed you were nodding there, Robbie.
Oh, yeah, well, my mum's born in Cloncurry and then goes for New South Wales, so I don't know how that works.
How does that work?
So every game, when we used to watch growing up, we used to kick her out and watch it somewhere else. And us boys and Dad, he's from Victoria but grew up most of his life in Gympie and Cloncurry. And we always give her crap. We never talk to Mum. So it was always, a great thing. And then my fiance is from Newcastle as well, so we have a bit of a tiff. Every time the Origin comes around, we give each other a bit of stick. So it's always, that rivalry has always been always there. And I know when Origin comes around, I get a lot nervous and anxious, knowing probably more than when I did competing at the Commonwealth Games in Glasgow 2014.
Really?
So I'm that passionate about Queensland. I went to my first Origin game last year, and the third one where we won 54-6. So I lost my voice in probably the first 5 minutes. Yeah. So I think, growing up, it's just in, like as Fiona said, you bleed maroon.
Fiona?
Amazing childhood memories. My dad's a leaguey, and I'm a Broncos girl through and through. Obviously, born and bred in Brisbane. And, I can still remember when Darren Lockyer had hair and he was so young, Yeah, but it was an institution, Mal Meninga, Queenslander, there are so many moments of it. But I think it became the first, coming together of Queensland versus New South Wales. But by virtue of that and off the back of that, it spawned a whole bunch of other interstate rivalries. So, whenever the Firebirds go up against the Swifts, it's always, state there's that Sydney versus Queensland just seems to have leaked into all other codes, and it's become definitely a badge of honour. But for one sport to unite a state in that way is incredibly powerful, and I think and to unite families and or to split them apart.
Yeah, she gets it all the time.
Alison, I wanted to talk about disability in sport as well, and Queensland. Does Queensland take care of its disabled athletes or its athletes with disabilities?
Oh, good question. Yes, they do. There's plenty of opportunity for people with a disability to be involved in sport, pick a sport, and there should be a pathway, she says optimistically as a sports administrator. It hasn't always been the case, but it is something that is improving more and more. The professionalism with sport is definitely growing, and we were talking before that we came up here on the panel about how the impact of the Sydney Paralympic Games had on that, on just educating the whole community in Australia about what is possible and that very much can-do attitude out there for people with disability. But it all has to come back to the grassroots, and there's a lot of opportunities where still we could tweak it a little bit and invest a bit more time and energy and money, the good old mighty dollar, into developing opportunities at a young age for children who might have been born with a disability or acquire their disability when they're very young. It can be pretty tough for the families. They're very much in survival mode on, getting up and getting out the door and getting to school each day. But let's add a bit of sport into that as well, and that whole possibilities of, being able to achieve things and, all the things that we get out of sport, confidence and whatnot, that can grow as well. And junior sport, I think, well, that's where we all learn the lifelong habits of, being involved in sport. So people with a disability, they need to get into it early because it's heaps and heaps of fun.
You played wheelchair basketball, which is pretty much looks like a killer sport. It looks like a sport that people who with no fear and possibly, I don't know, sadistic tendencies might tend to play. How much fun is it though? Because it looks fierce but fun.
Oh, it's amazing. It's awesome. And when I was younger, I may have rated the game, at the end of the game, the number of bruises that you'd have on the, oh, that was an amazing game. Look at these blisters and bruises. Yep, nailed it. Whereas, these days... but it was, it's just a great opportunity to match yourself with other players and just get out and forget the disability, even though you may be sitting on a wheelchair strapped into it doing your thing. The disability just doesn't come into it. You're playing a game of sport, you're playing a game of basketball, and you really want to beat the other team, and if the other team's from another state, even more so. You want to beat them. So yes, it's good.
I want to introduce a very special guest we have here with us tonight, Paralympic swimmer Tamara Nowitzki. If I can get you to stand up. How you doing?
Good, thank you.
What did it mean to you to be a Queenslander and swim at the Paralympics?
Swimming at the Paralympics was awesome. I was really proud to be able to represent my country and also my state, and to be part of something that I think Queenslanders had, they were very enthusiastic about the sport and the swimming, and to have the backing of the whole state behind me was quite incredible and amazing.
Which events did you swim in?
I won a silver medal in the 100-metre breaststroke, and I made the final for the 50 metres freestyle, and I had a heat swim in the 100 metres freestyle.
What was it like being... Yeah, round of applause. So what's it like being named on a Queensland... Well, it was an Australian team, I imagine, but you're a Queenslander in an Australian team. What did that mean for you?
That meant a lot to me. It was so exciting. When I made my first Australian team for the Paralympics in 1996, I didn't realise I had gotten on the team, and actually dropped my false teeth that night. I was shaking so much from the excitement of having made the team. I then had to go out and get new teeth spades.
It's an expensive sport. So how many teams did you make?
I made 2 Paralympic teams and a World Championship team.
Fantastic. Do you still swim?
Not so much anymore. I want to get back into doing a little bit, but when the weather warms up.
Spoken like a true Queenslander.
Yeah, it's 15 degrees. It's cold. People are sunbaking in the UK. The sun temperature. What do you think that people who have a disability can get out of swimming or playing the wheelchair basketball or whatever it is that you can do and do well?
I think people with that disability need to realise that in the sporting arena there is no disability, that they have the ability to be equal to everybody else, particularly in the water. I think that sense of disability disappears and you're just another great swimmer. And we've seen some great performances by elite disabled swimmers in this country. For example, Priya Cooper, who's a great idol of mine, and I've always looked up to her.
Tamara, it's great having you here. Thank you for coming in. There we go, Tamara Nowitzki. Now, of course, it's not just elite sport we're talking about. We've talked about kids, but what about community? Belonging in Queensland. What do you think it brings to a sense of community? Fiona?
I think Paul's comments earlier were very much spot on. It's kind of like the campfire. It's like the campfire that people gather around. I think if you have a reason to come together, then as human beings we naturally have a yearning to belong. It's actually it's part of how we're built as Homo sapiens, and we have a deep desire to be part of something, and sport's one of the easiest conduits through which to create a reason to come together. And then once you come together, I guess a context within which to create something. So, I think when people are in a sporting situation, and it's hard for me, I'm an individual athlete, but I still felt a very strong sense of community, even though, I'd head out to the track and I ultimately went through my paces by myself. It wasn't until I retired from sport that I realised how strong the community that I was connected to was. My coach was there for me every single day. And the team that I trained alongside, my training group, were an integral part of my everyday. Even though I competed against all the other female 100-metre sprinters, when we were in a relay together, we were a team. And I think that sense of desire to belong to something is sport's such an easy conduit through which to create that sense of connection and belonging.
Well, Robbie, you've been out to some Indigenous communities. What does, I suppose one of the things that comes to mind most recently is, of course, Jonathan Thurston after Origin 1,
Yep.
Doing the call out to the kids at Arakoon. What does that mean when somebody of his standing, says, hey, you're doing all right, get to school?
I think it means a lot. JT is as humble as he is, and to get that message out there to those kids is, to get them to stay in school, from someone from his calibre to say that means a lot. I know the new principal that's going out there at the moment, Mr. O'Hanlon, who used to be a principal at Blackwater State High School. He's now going up there. He's done a lot of great things all through Blackwater and through Brisbane at its not Sunnybank.
Beenleigh.
Yeah, Beenleigh, and he's done really good with the Indigenous kids out there. So my role model thing was with Red Dust is we go out there and help with kids that can't read, know the language. English is their third language, so it's quite tough to get through and get across that message. And we help out with their literacy, readings, sit in the classroom, make sure they stay in the classroom. I also tell my little story of where I've got to and where I've been, and I got to represent my country. And I tell them, I said, I used to be you. I used to be that shy kid in the back that never put my hand up and asked for help. So I always encourage them to put their hand up, ask for help, and don't be, as they say, shame job or all that kind of stuff. So the message that JT got out, I think, is massive for that community, Arakoon, what they're going through. And I know Athletics Australia went through there this year and did a lot of stints on the basics, jump, run, jump, throw. So it's good to get out there and get that message across because, you know, they have that culture, and elders are losing their cultures for their younger generations now, where they're not doing the dancing, so it's...
Yeah, they're not telling stories.
Yeah, and they're not telling their stories again. Tiwi College, where I just went, they do it every Wednesday afternoon with their guys, the women's and the men, so it's a really good thing, but it's hard when you're trying to get someone out of that community, you know, the homesick, because they're so family orientated. I got homesick quite a fair bit when I left home from Bowen to Canberra. It's just we've always had that closeness in our family, so it's very hard. You got to try and nurture that kid coming out of there and try and get them to go back out home to see family and keep involved in their culture as well. I never grew up with mine, so I'm starting to learn a little bit more now as I grow older.
Mm. Paul, of course, footy codes have, you know, in Queensland especially, have massive numbers of incredibly talented Indigenous players. How you must see that connection to community all the time.
Yeah, definitely, and particularly family. It's a real challenge. You know, I coached some men in the country that had more ability than many of the NRL players that you see running around, but they couldn't make that transition, or when they did, they were quickly back home again, because people underestimate the impact that has on moving away from country or family. And it's particularly important, and more and more you've got to manage that side of the athlete a lot more, the player a lot more, and you've got to be really cognizant of that. So I'm quite fortunate that majority of the teams that I coached in the country were 50% Indigenous, in some cases more, particularly like in Mount Isa when I was up there. So they were great learning opportunities for me, and I'm fortunate, you know, I can take those learnings into my job at the Broncos. We'll be in Warrabindra on Friday. It's another community. It's west of Brockhampton, not far from Bluff, actually.
Played there.
Yeah, but it was set up as a mission about 85 years ago, and there's 37 different tribal groups there. So they can be tough. They can be tough places, and sport has a real role to play there. So Justin Hodges and Jarrell Yair, who are two great Indigenous ambassadors, they're both going out there on Friday as well. So that will give a massive lift to that community. But I guess knowing that you've got to do much more than just sort of driving in and driving out. And I don't actually profess to know what the solution is, but I just say to people that just try and put yourself in the position of some of these people before you pass judgment, you know, in terms of what can happen in some of those communities, and be kind and be prepared to sort of open up your mind to, and your heart also, to what others are experiencing. And I think if we can do that, look, because people say, how do you help? And I think if you can just countenance the thought of what other people go through, we're on the way, because it's been a generational problem, and I used to wrestle with the fact, how do you solve it? Well, you just do your bit while you can, and you be kind to people, and you care about people, and that's at the end of the day, that's all you can really do. And whatever the actions you take out of that, if it makes a difference, that's a real bonus.
Okay, we'll go to audience questions in just a moment. But I just wanted to ask also, sport can be a way out of poverty, of many things. It can lead to a whole lot of opportunities that otherwise you wouldn't have. But how do we get the message that sport can do all that for you, but you need an education as well? You can't rely on sport as you tick it out because you get one injury, or maybe you find that actually I miss home too much, whatever it is, that education is just as important. Who wants to tackle that one?
I'll jump in there.
Fiona.
I believe he's supported. Obviously, I spent 5.5 years working for Australian University Sport. So they're a peak body that essentially administrates sport for universities. And our biggest mandate is the dual career education side of things. So, the statistics over the last 3 Olympic Games, 64% of all the medals won were by student athletes. That means that the best of the best in this country are studying as well as competing at elite level. And that's not surprising. Often you'll find people who excel at sport will have brains as well. But even then, there needs to be support and systems in place to actually help elite athletes, particularly in tertiary education, to be able to have leniency change. If you're going to represent your country at Olympic Games and your accounting exam happens to be on the same week, you kind of need the uni to give you some leniency. So there's still a ways to go in that space. But I think as well, for me, as university games kept me in sport. So when I transitioned out of high school, I would have dropped off the radar with a lot of other women, like a lot of young girls do. But it was just the fact that at uni, someone said, "What about uni games?" And I went to compete and it kept me in track and field. And then it was at a second uni games that I decided maybe I've got what it takes to be the best and have a go at this. And it was only from there, as a 20, almost 21-year-old, that I actually I got a coach for the first time, same sort of thing as you, Robbie. And then, believed enough that I could actually go ahead and ended up representing my country 5 times. It's one of those things around, but I finished my education, I finished my uni degree, and trained and competed and worked part-time whilst training full-time and represented my country. So I think absolutely, whether I come from a upper middle class working family, I was given every opportunity, and I think it actually doesn't matter what your background is, what your culture is, what your socio-economic status is. Sport is something that will be a gateway that opens you up to realise what's possible, and someone who engages in sport is going to learn communication, discipline, time management, leadership, all of those things. And if you've got that, and then you have a message that says people who play sport also are well educated, and you guys would be using that with those kids. You'd be saying, right, we're going to go play sport, but first we're going to do reading and writing. Yep. And until we do the reading and writing, we ain't touching that ball. And they're like, all right, let's get this done, because I want to play with that ball. And they have to go hand in hand, and it is honestly, I think the future of elite sport in this country will rely heavily on the university sector for the facilities and for the sports science. We're already seeing really high-level football codes and clubs, make alliances with universities, etc. The AIS doesn't exist as it used to anymore. It's now been redistributed to the states. So, the future of sport will be heavily entrenched in the education system, albeit the tertiary, but it's school sport that keeps people connected, and it's that education and sport that's the future, and that's how this country's going to keep being great.
Summed it up well.
Thank you.
All right, we might take a few questions before we finish. Oh, you're going to make me walk upstairs. Okay. I'm surrounded by fit people and I'm whining about walking upstairs. Here we go.
Not so fit.
I'm sure you're very fit.
My name is Alison Goldsby. Can you hear me? Yes, I'm the independent chair of Taekwondo in Queensland, and I'm driving always sport, the benefits of sport, the health benefits of sport, and the business benefits of sport sponsoring, but also those athletes creating business deals on that field and actually then bringing something back to Queensland in that space. We are very fortunate. We have low unemployment rates at the moment. Part of that is based around sport. We also have some fantastic outcomes in our sport fields that lead back into Queensland. And I'm curious how you guys would either market to groups to actually encourage kids into sport, and also how to bring those benefits to those kids or to the sport in general and Queensland.
Good question.
I think, the way I'd go with, if it was specific to disability, it'd be just showing people what can be done. I'd love to get on the back page of the Courier Mail or something like that. There's a lot of sport that happens, but people don't know what it's like, and those parents that are surviving each day, they don't know what it could possibly look like, and they're not going to let their kid out to try it unless they are confident with that. So, yeah, there is a lot more of it getting out there. There's a lot more TV. It's not just elite sport, Paralympic sport, but that is getting on TV, which is really exciting. But we just need to promote it more and more. And I guess Facebook and things like that, social media, we can get clips out quicker and easier to our communities.
Tell a story. Tell the stories of your people. People want to hear stories, honestly. They want to hear real stories. They want to hear inspiring stories. So if you've got examples and of people that have succeeded and the benefits that have got them, put faces to names, and use mediums like social media, which are low barrier to entry, very cost effective. People don't care if it's a grainy, bumpy video; they just want the story. If you've got a great story, just tell it and tell it to as many people as you can, and find as many stories as you can. And I mean that's how you're dreaming your culture. It's all in story. So tell the stories, and sports have great stories.
Yeah, I might be going a different way, but it's hard now to get messages across to kids of this generation with computer games and on their phone,
many
with social
distractions.
media as well. It's quite tough to get that message across. And we visit schools, we go out and instruct, football codes as well. Go out and they might get that little high for a bit that day, and then back on the computer game. So it's quite tough to get that message across to kids these days. Because I know when I was at school, that's all I did was after every school do homework, and then I'm out in the backyard kicking the football, or running and riding around, building BMX tracks. I don't think we do enough of that these days. I think the society we live in now, we're getting a little bit afraid of letting our kids go out in the backyard.
Absolutely.
It's tough. Growing up in country town, I was just riding and playing sport just about every day.
Yeah, so as an 8-year-old, you'd been on the treadmill to school and back, and
riding to school, walking to school.
Yeah, you'd be out till sundown, and Mum would scream out, "Oi, time to come in."
I think I was listening to who won gold medal back in Melbourne, I think 56 games, and he said the same thing. He goes, the Kenyans, why they run so fast these days is they're running to school with their backpacks 10Ks every day, there and back, and maybe during lunchtime as well. They might go run back and then run back. These days, I think he said, I think it's Herb Elliott actually, who said this. And,
that guy.
And he's like, I used to run and ride to school every day, and I think we're losing that, and that's why we're losing most of our distance runners these days, and why we're not so competitive in track and field these days as well, not just in all other sports as well. So I think that message, the computer games, I've never really liked it, so I'm always out and about.
I couldn't sit still. So
Yeah,
long enough.
exactly right. I don't know what your thoughts are, Paul.
I agree with telling a story. I think a story sort of captures people's attention, and I think people want to hear real stories as well. They want to hear the truth. They want to see vulnerability, or you got to be authentic. That's the best marketing tool. I agree with social media. The ability to fund and they call it crowdfunding, I think now, but to be able to get a story out there pretty quickly and generate revenue from that, I think that's a good opportunity. You were saying something there, Robbie, about the way we've grown up. One of the things we've got to be careful of, I was only speaking to someone the other night about this. I earn a great income, much more than I ever did as a police officer, but we've just got to make sure that as our society, as we gain more and more sort of material possessions, and our standard of living notionally is a lot better than what my parents' generation was, we've got to make sure that we bring up in my case, I hold myself account to bring up my children, that they actually appreciate what they've got. Because I look at photos of men going to war, men and women going to war, and go to the Australian War Museum, and no one's got an ounce of fat on them. And they ate eggs and they ate butter and they ate bread and the similar things, but they walked to school, they worked hard, they helped out at home. So we've got to be a bit hard on our kids, I think, to bring back some of those standards, because I think that's what made us a great sporting nation as well. Just that hard work ethic, I suppose, and a fairly uncomplicated lifestyle and diet. So
Yeah, definitely. Get back to basics.
There wasn't many coffee shops around in the 60s and 70s. They're everywhere now.
Hey, back off the coffee shops. Do we have another question?
Hi, my name's Monique. I'm a HP teacher, and I have probably a two-part question. So we've spoken a lot about elite sport tonight, which is not the reality for most student participants, as much as we'd like to say it is. And I guess my question's about legacy, so what you were talking about earlier, Paul.
Yes.
In terms of an ongoing, sustainable, community-based physical activity and sport option, what do you see the future being like with that? I mean, parkrun is a fantastic example of that, but it would be nice to see things that aren't reliant on schools to play that role or on sporting organisations to invest, or that also aren't reliant on money coming in from gambling. So I'm curious as to what your, I guess, dream might be. Sorry, hard question.
No, yeah. I would say that, like anything, and I think if we've learnt anything from social media, it's actually made us realise that it's really important to connect with people that are like-minded, and groups form around very specific desires, and either they believe the same things as each other, or they're interested in the same things, and that's what forms them, that's what gels them together. So when it comes to a mass participation style sporting endeavour, it's not about winning, it's not about competition, it's not about elite, it's about belonging, and it's about fellowship, it's about friendship, it's about movement. Just to move is the simplest thing for a group of people. I have a personal philosophy that my husband actually helped develop. We call it, it's very simple, it's 4 words: breathe, move, nourish, play. I would love to see that be at the core of a mass participation movement. We breathe, it's life. Very few people get taught how to breathe properly, and very few people actually breathe properly. All of us have been sitting in this room for almost 40 minutes. Who's actually taken a deep breath? Yeah, move. Just walking sometimes is all that's required. Just bending over and touching your toes. Nourish is not just about food, it's about soul. And then play. When was the last time you played? That's the beauty of sport. You get to play. You get to have fun. You get to enjoy. You get to interact. Play is so much more than just, it's not for kids. It's, I'm soon to be 37 years old, and I am the youngest and the happiest I've ever felt because I play at every opportunity. So maybe that's something.
I just wanted to throw in, and I know you mentioned maybe schools not having to do it, but one of the things I remember doing, or that we did en masse when I went to school, before school there would be footy going on, or some sort of game you're not allowed to play anymore, like brandy, or British Bulldog, Red Rover, and you'd have you'd have 40 kids out there playing the one game before you went into school, running off the excess energy before you had to sit down, and then you get out and do the exact same thing. Games you're not allowed to play now, and I understand people get hurt, but as you said, bumps and bruises, when did a bump or a bruise or a bit of blood become, or mud or whatever it is, becomes such a bad thing? And I suppose I would put that is what's gone as well, is this ability for kids just to organise themselves without some adult having to be there and set it all up and referee the darn thing, and everybody having a say on who's doing that to my child, and it's, and I'm not saying the bullying is a good thing, absolutely not, but part of it was the rough and tumble of getting out there. Definitely. And girls and boys playing that same game together as well. Like, we all did it. Yeah. And they don't do it anymore. If schools have to have their kids sit down before school, because of legal reasons. This is madness.
It is madness.
And that, I think that's part of what you're after, is what we had and we lost.
I think I would love it. I'm doing HB teacher training at the moment, so I think I would love to be able to say to schools and to HB teachers, teach the curriculum, the national curriculum, because it requires students to connect to environment. It requires them to play games from their own and other cultures. It requires them to make up games, which for some students, making up a game with a piece of equipment and making up rules is foreign to them. And unfortunately, we see that coming through as teachers, and the difference between the skills in Year 7 now and the skills in Year 7 5 or 6 years ago is really noticeable. And that's where I also question the schools having elite development pathways from early secondary, because these kids don't have the broad range of skills. So why are you pushing them into a futsal program or netball program or whatever it is to differentiate as a school? Say, we've got this thing, when they don't have the skills to participate in sport and physical activity in general as young people and as adults.
It's a really good point. I think we talked about legacy. I mean, participation's obviously key to every sport, and unfortunately, junior rugby league registrations are plateauing, so that's an issue for our game. We've got to identify that and find out ways of addressing that with other options, touch footy, touch rugby league, sort of that can cater for both male and female participation. But if you think about most of the most enjoyable sport you play is an organised sport. It's in the backyard, or it's in a park, or, you know, dare I say, it was in our lounge room at times, and Mum used to...
No, it came off the wall, on the full, got it, yes.
So my brother and I would play cricket in the hallway and things like that. So I just think our legacy can be just, like I loved encouraging my girls to explore and play, and sort of, I'd be excited by their excitement of just, you know, doing something, you know, in the backyard. So I think we can all play a little bit of a role there, because I think that's what leads to elite sport. All the stories about Don Bradman and some of our greatest sports people, it was all developed in their backyard. The Walters brothers in rugby league, they played in the backyard, and Kevin always talks, there was a concrete pathway out to the clothesline, so they'd get tackled on that, and that made them... And they said one of the brothers was scared of the dark, so the dad put up a spotlight. So they all played for their country and their state, but they learnt in the backyard of their house at Ipswich, belting the hell out of each other, you know, which is not a bad outcome when you think about, you know, what they've turned. They've all made good careers out of sport.
We had a question on Twitter come through about the connection that you can make with newcomers to Australia via sport. What have you seen in your travels when it comes to, you know, I know that in the AFL, for example, a lot of the Sudanese love the game, and we're starting to see Sudanese players playing professionally as well. And, you know, there's a tradition of the Greek and Italian players making their way to, you know, when it was VFL, to Footscray and, you know, the suburbs that they were all in, and it becomes a part of, sport becomes a part of being an Aussie. Have you seen that in your travels, Fiona?
Absolutely. Actually, the Sudanese are helping Australia get back on the distance running map, definitely. Absolutely. I think, again, sport just has the ability to bring people together and to create that sense of belonging. And if you're new to Australia or new to any community, it's one of the easiest ways to be connected, and certainly for young kids it is. I think as well we've got to remember that this country was forged. We're actually, aside from the traditional owners, we're all foreigners. We're all immigrants. We all came here in some way, shape, or form from somewhere else. You know, the Chinese were here at the gold rush. You know, like, so as a nation, we were always multicultural from the get-go. I think, you know, there's some obvious parts in Australia's history where we've had significant influx of immigrants, and, you know, like you were saying the Footscray, so, you know, the Greeks and the Italians, you know, they had the fruit shops and they're the tilers and the plumbers, and they built Australia in the 70s and 80s, and then, or earlier even, and then, you know, we're now into time in our life cycle as a nation where we've got refugees. So the people of Sudan have settled here in Australia. A lot of them in Brisbane and Maroon, and it seems to be, Australia is the lucky country and will forever be the lucky country. And I think we stand to benefit gratefully from the talents of the world coming to live here. And we're starting to really see that now in generations on the sporting field, at not only the grassroots but certainly at the elite level as well. So again, I think the DNA of the sport of our nation will continue to evolve, and will, Tatiana Grigorieva, for goodness sake, Russian but Australian, and we owned her at the 2000 Olympics. She's ours. So it's a really interesting thing. I think to be Australian is one thing, and it has a little less to do with DNA and culture and more to do with belonging and country.
Well, look, we might leave it there this evening. So I'd like you all to put your hands together and thank our panellists tonight: Robbie Crowther, Fiona Cullen, Alison Mosley and Paul White. And thank you so much for coming along. We'll be replaying this tomorrow afternoon between 1 and 2. If you want to have a listen back, we'll put it online for you as well. But thank you for your attendance, and I hope you've enjoyed it. I'm Kelly Higgins-Devine.